Hey, hi. So I guess I was supposed to talk about chapters 7 through 9 of Grendel by John Gardner. A little background information. Grendel is the story of the epic poem of Beowulf retold by the monster from Beowulf, which is Grendel. Grendel is like this swamp creature. He's kind of furry, I think. He is furry because you can see him here. But he lives in a swamp, so that kind of threw me off. Anyway, so the main characters that we're going to be talking about really are Grendel, obviously, is a title character, and he narrates this story. Hrothgar, king of the Danes, and his men, a man named Hygmod, who is lord of the Helmings, his sister Weltha, who ends up being Hrothgar's wife. And then that's just for chapter 7, but we will get to the characters for chapter 8. One of my favorite things that happened in these particular chapters was, I think it starts on page 96 if you're looking in this copy of the book. But it is when Grendel, he goes down to like kind of observe Hrothgar and his men at their campsite, which is something he would typically do before he would go and like attack, or he would just go watch and then go back and then kind of like retreat and then come back and attack them. He would always come back to attack them and eat them. It was just really like gross and like uncomfortable. And so anyways, he goes down to this campsite and they're not there. So none of these men are at their campsite where they normally are. And so he follows their tracks in the dirt, their like footprints, and sees that they've gone to Hygmod's camp. And so Grendel is sitting there watching this scene unfold, and what happens is Hrothgar calls out Hygmod, and he makes this long speech. He says, "You don't want to fight us. We are stronger than you. You're outnumbered, outmanned. I guess that's the same thing. You don't have enough plans. You have a weak army. We're stronger. We're better. Don't fight us." And so Hygmod doesn't protest. He's like, "I get it. You guys are stronger. You're better. I don't want to fight you. That would be ill-advised." And so he takes his sword and he lays it down at Hrothgar's feet, which is a sign of peace and truce. So he doesn't fight him. And he says, "Actually, here, take my sword and also take our gift, take our treasure." And Hrothgar says, "I don't want your treasure. I just want to know that we're not going to fight." And Hygmod says, "No, you do. You do want this treasure." And so he goes back into his camp and comes back out with surprise, his sister. His sister is the treasure, I guess. And he wants Hrothgar to marry his sister, to form like a alliance between their clans, their groups. And so Hrothgar does. And then while Grendel is watching this unfold, as soon as he sees Weltha for the first time, he is just like taken aback by how beautiful she is. And this part of the book was like really poignant because it demonstrated Grendel's, even through being a monster, it demonstrated his desire that's kind of, I think, innate in all human beings to some degree. A desire, like the want to be wanted. And Grendel feels this because he's been deprived of it all of his life because he's a grotesque monster. So no one wants him. His own mother, he says she's basically useless. She can hardly communicate with him anymore. He can't stand his mother. He disrespects her. He thinks she's worthless, basically. So there is no one who like wants Grendel, which makes sense. He's a murderous monster who kills people, but still he wants to be wanted because he thinks like a human and he processes like a human, and he has those desires. And so this is something I didn't really like about the book. It caused me to feel pity for this murderous, grotesque monster. And that was kind of uncomfortable because you don't normally, you read Beowulf and you think, wow, like you want Beowulf to kill Grendel because he's terrorizing the people and killing everyone and eating them. And why would you want that to live? And it's just weird. It's an unsettling feeling to read it from his perspective and to have pity on him and to want him to feel that love and that acceptance. I I guess it's not a bad thing about the book that it makes you feel that way. It's just it made me kind of uncomfortable. And so anyway, uh, while Grendel is watching this scene unfold, children come down to Wealhtheow and start grabbing her skirts and like playing with her and like dancing. And he wants to be one of them because he also, I think, craves like a motherly love because, like I was saying earlier, his mom is basically useless. So that was something that that was an incident that I really liked about the book, but also something that I wasn't crazy about. It made me a little uncomfortable. That scene just really made me pity him. And so anyway, moving on to chapter 8. Chapter 8, some new characters are Helga. Helga, I don't know. Hrothgar's brother, he was just murdered. So because he was murdered, this causes his son, Hrothulf, Helga's 14, I don't know how to say it, his 14-year-old son, so that would be Hrothgar's nephew, comes to live with Hrothgar and Wealhtheow, his new aunt. And so Hrothgar thinks that Hrothulf is plotting against him for the throne because he's very quiet and like pretty shady and keeps to himself. Hrothulf is. And so Hrothulf is kind of a philosopher, kind of a real in-depth social thinker, and he is very unhappy with the socioeconomic system in his community, and so he befriends this really like grumpy peasant named Red Horse, and that becomes his friend and advisor. And on page 113, Hrothulf has this long soliloquy in the yard where he's just lamenting the problems that he sees in society. And Red Horse, his friend and advisor, peasant guy, is telling him that basically all governments are essentially evil. And so that's kind of a story with Hrothulf. And Wealhtheow has a lament here too because she sees Hrothulf and her two sons. At this point, she and Hrothgar have two sons of their own. And she sees the friendship between Hrothulf and her two sons, and she's lamenting the day that that friendship will end because her sons will inherit the throne as they should, and Hrothulf will resent them for that because he won't. So she kind of laments the day that that friendship will die. As far as Grendel goes in this chapter, right now, Grendel is trying to justify his actions, and he is saying that his attacks give men dignity and nobility. He says that his attacks define men and give them their purpose. And that is how he is trying to justify his killing and his attacks on the people. Moving into chapter 9, a new character in chapter 9 is someone called the Destroyer, and he is a god of the Danes, who is he's a Skelding god, who the priests pray to perform a ritual, like a ceremony, to ask this god to rid them of Grendel. And the priest that's kind of like in charge of this ceremony, his name is Orc. And so Grendel actually, it's kind of weird. Grendel comes and watches this this ritual that is performed, trying to, praying to the gods to get rid of him. And so he watches it, and it doesn't really bother him, except for it's not so much that bothers him, but all throughout this chapter, he's been having like visions that have really been disturbing him. And after he watches this ritual, he leaves. This is how the chapter ends. He leaves from his spot watching the ritual, and he has a very short vision, but a very powerful vision of the sun as just a black revolving sphere that's covered in spiders. And it really fills him with like this imminent sense of overwhelming dread. And I think that is because he can sense that it's different this time, that this plea that the people have made to their gods to get rid of him is, maybe more powerful, because if you've read Beowulf, you know that eventually Beowulf does come in and save Hrothgar's people from Grendel, and he kills Grendel. And so I think Grendel can kind of sense that his time is running out, that something more powerful than him is going to be taking him out. very, very shortly. Let's see, something I really enjoyed about this book, especially that I saw come out to play in the chapters I was assigned to report, was the shift in Grendel's narrative abilities in between chapter 6 and 7. At the beginning, he really is kind of a shallow narrator. He doesn't really elaborate on his feelings or go into depth on the narrative power, the literary powers that he has. I really like how he evolves as a narrator in chapter 7. Something that he was really fascinated with in earlier chapters of the book was the shaper and the stories. But he has kind of become a shaper himself in this chapter 7 and on, because his language is maturing. He's really harnessing the literary power that he has within his stories and his encounters and just the life that he's living. So that's something I really liked about the book. I think that was something I found to be really neat and compelling to keep, reading it. Now, would I recommend the book? It depends on who's asking. I wouldn't really recommend it to everyone. If you're not an avid reader, I would say don't try to read it because it's kind of complicated. If you've read Beowulf, I would read it, because if you've read Beowulf, you should definitely be able to understand Grendel. And Grendel is, I think it would enrich your view of Beowulf. If you're looking for a book to just read for fun, I would say this probably is not it, but it's not bad. So, I mean, if you're brave, if you really, it's entertaining, it's interesting, but if you're just looking for an easy read on the beach, or something to curl up on the couch with a nice, cup of tea, I would not say that Grendel is that book. But yeah, it's not bad. So those are my chapters, and that was Grendel.